We now invite Roseanne Frankenberg up to light the chalice this morning. Please look in your order of service and say with me the words that are printed there.
Switch. Was it on? Yay. Okay. All right, but let me get my hand. If the children could come on up for a message for all ages, that would be wonderful. Let's see if this stays up. Is this okay? Okay. Hello. So the name of today's service is We're Not That Far Apart. And what that meant to me was that we have more in common than it might look like. So I have a story for you today called The Knight and the Dragon. Some of you may have read this before. It's a silly story, but I think it goes well with our topic today. And there are some really great pictures that not everybody is going to be able to see. So just imagine the story as we tell it, okay? Once upon a time, there was a knight in a castle who had never fought a dragon, and in a cave not too far away was a dragon who had never fought a knight. One day, the knight went to the castle library and took out all of the books he could find on dragon fighting. Meanwhile, back at the cave, the dragon had rummaged through all the things from his ancestors and found some books on knight fighting. The knight began to build some armor. The dragon practiced swishing his tail. Meanwhile, back at the castle, we see that the knight has built up quite an armory. And the dragon back at the cave has become quite ferocious. They practiced their new skills, but they weren't very good. The knight built a big wooden dragon and ran completely past it and crashed into a tree. The dragon built a knight made of hay and bonked himself onto a hill. A maiden is seeing all this nonsense happening. They're just not getting it right. But they feel ready. And finally, the knight and the dragon sent each other a letter to set a time for the fight. And fight day came, and it was a mess. They just completely missed each other. No damage was done, except maybe to themselves. Just not happening. The maiden, now riding a book cart, has an idea. She hands the dragon a book called The Outdoor Cookbook, and the knight a book called How to Build a Barbecue. They sit down together and they read their books. And before you know it, they're opening the K&D Barbecue Restaurant together. So even though these natural enemies couldn't get it together to fight each other, they could get it together to do something positive. The end. So we can get up and go to class.
Time for the tall people to speak. Good morning. Today's reading is from The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama and Howard Cutler. I'm sure I've mentioned it before here. When dealing with another person on any level, if you're having some difficulties, it's extremely helpful to be able to put yourself in the other person's place and see how you would react to the same situation. Even if you have no common experience with the other person or have a very different lifestyle, you can try this through imagination. This technique involves the capacity to temporarily suspend insisting on your viewpoint, but rather to look from the other person's perspective, to imagine what would be the situation if you were in his shoes. How would you deal with this? Even if you have no common experience, this would help you develop an awareness and respect for another person's feelings, which is an important factor in reducing conflicts and problems with other people. Whenever I meet people, I always approach them from the standpoint of the most basic things we have in common. We each have a physical structure, a mind, emotion. We are all born the same way and we all die. All of us want happiness and do not want to suffer. Looking at others from this standpoint, rather than emphasizing secondary differences, such as the fact that I am Tibetan or a different color, or religion, or cultural background, allows me to have a feeling that I'm meeting someone just the same as me. I find that relating to others on that level makes it much easier to exchange and communicate with one another. really good, Jim. It sounds like Dwayne Eddy. What was that? Stevie Ray Vaughan. Okay, another great guitar player. Good morning again, and thank you for having me back. A few years ago, the doorbell rang on a Saturday morning, and as soon as I opened the door, I knew that the people standing in front of me were two Jehovah's Witnesses. A middle-aged woman in the front and a young man in the back, very neatly dressed, as Jehovah's Witnesses always are. And before they could get a word in, I said, I'm very happy with my denomination. I'm a Unitarian Universalist, and you don't need to make your pitch. Without batting an eye, the woman said, Unitarian Universalism, what is that? What do you believe in? So I gave her my elevator speech. You know, we believe in social justice and tolerance and acceptance, and everybody has the right and ability to follow their own spiritual paths and yada, yada, yada. And again, without missing a beat, the woman said, could I just show you this Bible passage? And I could feel my eyes rolling in my head. But I said, okay. So she whips out her smartphone. The message hasn't changed, but the technology has gotten much better with the Jehovah's Witnesses. And she points to this, scrolls and points to this section from the chapter, a chapter in the Gospel of Mark. To give you a context of it, it's Jesus is having a meal with the outcasts of society, which he often did, and the Pharisees, the establishment of the Jewish religion there in Palestine, is looking at him, and they just can't believe he's doing this. These were not only societal outcasts, but religious outcasts as well. And so they say, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. And as soon as I looked at it, I began to laugh. And I assured her quickly that I was not laughing at her or at the passage. What I was laughing at was the fact that I used the same quote in a sermon I gave 3 weeks ago at my own church. For the first time in recorded history, a Jehovah's Witness didn't know what to say. And when we parted afterwards, and I closed the door and sort of shook my head, and I said, isn't this weird? You know, both of us use the same Bible passage, and yet we're so far apart in the way we see religion and the world. And then I thought, maybe we aren't that far apart. In that sermon that I gave, that I mentioned a few weeks earlier, it was about compassion. And I quoted from Karen Armstrong, who wrote a book on compassion and has really got really into the compassion movement, has a website and so forth. And she said in her sermon, in her book, every one of the major faiths has compassion, the ability to feel with the other, as not only the true test of religiosity, but what brings us into the presence of what Jews, Christians, and Muslims call God or the divine. Now, even for an atheist like myself, that resonated. Of course, if I had told the Jehovah's Witnesses I was an atheist, that really would have blown their mind. How we treat each other and how we treat ourselves and how we treat our planet is what the great spiritual leaders of all time have said. In one way or another, Buddha, Jesus, Confucius, whether you believe in the resurrection or whether you believe in keeping a kosher kitchen or whether you believe in abstaining from alcohol, all of those things are really, or should be, beside the point, because that message really transcends all of those, what I think are extraneous differences. Unfortunately, in recent years, but also through history, extremists have hijacked religion in the name of their belief in that religion. And we have seen that most recently with extremist Muslims who actually kill more Muslims than they do non-Muslims who don't believe the way they believe, which they assume is the correct way to believe. But Christians also have a very sad history in that respect too. The Spanish Inquisition, the persecution of Huguenots, all of those people who didn't believe exactly the way the people in power thought they should have believed. I remember a few years ago, there was a general in the U.S. Army who was fighting terrorists in Somalia. I don't remember why the heck we were in Somalia, but he said that he was going to win because I knew my God was bigger than his. I knew that my God was real and his God was an idol. And that sounds very childish, but unfortunately, that kind of talk is all too common these days. These differences that I spoke about really have layered over the essence of what religion is and spirituality is over the centuries. So that to get to that essence of what Karen Armstrong talked about, it's almost like being an archaeologist. You got to dig through these layers of extraneous, unnecessary, and unimportant material to get to what's really important about life and how we treat each other. And if you had to put that essence into one sentence, it would be, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, which we have come to know as the Golden Rule, which was promulgated by Confucius about 25 centuries ago. And if your faith doesn't have that as a core, regardless of what you call yourself, then something is missing. You either have not understood things, or you're terribly mistaken about what religion is all about. My sister Maria, in the last 15 years or so, has become a conservative evangelical Christian. We were all raised as Roman Catholics. And she believes in the Golden Rule, but she also believes that what is more important is that you accept Jesus Christ as your personal Savior. I always thought the words personal Savior seemed kind of odd, like personal chef or personal trainer. And, yeah, I'm working with God to work on my abs. She has said to me on more than one occasion, knowing full well that I'm a Unitarian who believes in deeds, not creeds, that good works are not enough. They're fine, but they're not enough to get you in heaven or to be saved. And the upshot of that to me is you could be a combination of Nelson Mandela, the Dalai Lama, and Gandhi, but if you don't have Jesus Christ as your personal Savior, you're going south. Now, think of that logic for a moment. You do what Jesus did. You did what Jesus said you should do, but unless you accept him as your personal Savior, you're doomed. Whether consciously or unconsciously, people like my sister find ways, or at least see ways, in which we are distinct from one another. And like skin color and sexual orientation, those things are really beside the point. And yes, I am aware that there are some who think that color and sexual orientation are more than something beside the point, and that's even more unfortunate. But sometimes these distinctions are not only irrelevant, they don't even exist. A few years ago, Westchester University conducted an experiment, and they got a cross-section of alumni and students and faculty to fill out these questionnaires about who they thought they were. That is to say, where did you come from? What's your background? What is your ethnic and religious heritage? And people filled out these forms, and I think I'm 100% African, I'm 50% Italian, 50% Irish, or whatever. And then they gave all these people the DNA test. And in almost every case, people were surprised to find out that they weren't who they thought they were. And many of them said, maybe we're not that far apart from each other if we're all sort of, different but the same, or we're all coming from different places. And so why should we make that a distinction? And if that doesn't humble you, consider that the bonobo and the chimpanzee, who are the two closest relatives to us in the animal kingdom, share 99% of our DNA. Now, that doesn't mean that finding common ground is easy. In fact, I think it seems to have become more difficult in the last couple of years. My wife said to me when I told her I was doing a sermon on the whole concept of we're not that far apart based on the Jehovah Witnesses I met. She said, yeah, but they think you're going to hell. And I think, well, that may be true enough, but since I don't believe in hell, I don't think that carries much weight. I don't know if I've said this before, but I think something like 20% of Unitarians believe in heaven and 10% believe in hell. I think the difference is the universals are bringing up that heaven part. And I think the fact that, with regard to the Jehovah Witnesses, the fact that I believe differently from them in terms of where we're going when we die shouldn't make any difference with how we treat each other on this earth. I think the resurrection is baloney, but my brother Russ thinks it's the core of his Roman Catholic faith. My brother Russ has remained a Roman Catholic and is even more conservative than he was when we were kids. And I'm sure he loves me and probably feels badly that I'm going to hell, but I think he would do the same thing I would do in a situation where somebody needed help. Somebody who was sick, somebody who was hungry, somebody who was homeless. And we've seen that time and time again. When you are in need, it doesn't make any difference who you are. Unfortunately, again, there are some exceptions to that. And the thing is, that's what Jesus said and did. I like to tell my people that I'm an atheist, but I believe in Jesus. And what I mean by that is, I believe in the things that Jesus said about how we should treat each other, how we should feed the hungry and clothe the naked and so forth, just like he did in that quote that I read. And I applaud Pope Francis for reintroducing to many people the fact that that's what Jesus was all about. Unfortunately, a lot of Catholics still don't get the point. When the Pope was here a few years ago, his office sent around a press release telling everybody where he was going to visit when he was here, hospitals and schools and so forth. And one of the institutions was a prison. And somebody wrote a letter to the editor saying, couldn't he have visited somebody more worthy? Well, the fact is that Jesus visited prisoners as well and told people, visit people in prison. So I guess the question is, why do so many people feel it necessary to separate themselves from other people when it comes to religion, whether people of the same religion or people in a different religion? And I think that one reason is that religion is a lifeline for a lot of people. And if they question the principles of their religion, they think that they will spiritually drown. For example, if Jesus didn't perform all those miracles, if he didn't resurrect himself, then, what does that say about my faith if that's the core of my faith? Maybe I should be a Jew. And if Jew thinks, well, if all the stories in the Hebrew Bible are fairy tales, like the parting of the Red Sea, I might as well be a pagan. And of course we would say, what's wrong with being pagan? Another reason is that people feel the need to feel that their religion is the only religion. And I think you've heard people say that. Forrest Church notes in A Chosen Faith, religion is dangerous because its power is independent of the validity of its claims. And he adds that the logic of religious terrorists makes a demonic kind of sense. For example, if you and I are having a disagreement about a major principle of religion or faith, one of us has to be wrong, but the person who believes that his faith says this is the way it has to be right. So that leaves him with the option of, okay, if I'm right and you're wrong, because I have to be right, do I ignore you? Do I try to convert you? Or do I, in some cases, if I'm an extremist, try to destroy you? The Jews are not known for being extremists, but they do have often talked about being the chosen people. Not all the Jews, but some. And I remember a friend of mine who was a member of my congregation who was raised a Jew said he became a Unitarian because he didn't, excuse me, believe that anybody was a chosen person. Now, we Unitarians don't care if we're the chosen people or not. At least I don't think so. We recognize and celebrate all faiths, which is why our services are littered with readings and quotes from not only a variety of religious texts, but also non-religious texts. The closing works today are from William Shakespeare. What matters to us is how we treat each other. And so we, as UUs, do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, not because a book tells us or because we think we're going to get into heaven. And finally, the distinctions that we make amongst ourselves are not limited to religion, as I think all of us know. We can find common ground with people who are of different political views as well as religious views. Margaret and Paul are two friends of ours that we've known for at least 30 years. We were in their wedding, and they were in our wedding, and we knew that they were sort of conservative politically, but we never made much of it until they voted for George W. Bush twice. And so we had a hard time reconciling their vote, their support, with our friendship. Not just because they were Republicans and we weren't, but because we thought that that era was a very destructive era for the country. And we struggled with that for, the 8 years during Bush's presidency. But a few years ago, we had our 40th anniversary, my wife and I, and we invited a bunch of people, and, including Paul and Margaret. And after dinner, Margaret got up and was the first person to speak and talked about how important our relationship was and what good people we were. And so my wife and I got up immediately and hugged her, and we thought, well, this is great. I guess we're not that far apart. Unfortunately, the last few years have made that fragile coexistence much more difficult. And I'm sure the same may be true for some of you here in this room. I wish I could say that I have found some inner strength to take it to the next level with Paul and Margaret after the last presidential election. But unfortunately, I haven't. And I'm still trying. I'm in a group that deals with compassion, that meets regularly based on the Karen Armstrong book and the sermon I gave on that compassion. And I hope I can resolve within myself to find the strength to make that connection again. Because in truth, Paul and Margaret have a lot of great qualities. But so far I haven't, and I think a lot of people are struggling with that. And I don't think we're lesser human beings because we're struggling with that. I think that's a normal part of what it means to be a human being. But I do think that as you use, it's important for us to at least keep on trying. Maybe so. Thank you.
Please rise in body or spirit. Join in our closing hymn, number 159. This is my psalm.
Closing words today are from Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, taken from a monologue given by the character Shylock. I am a Jew. Hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions, fed with the same food, hurt with the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as Christians? If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die?